You're watching MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23, a free educational service provided by Circle City Broadcasting of Indianapolis. Here's what's coming up this hour. Get more information, special announcements, and weekly program schedules online at wishtv.com. And be sure to follow us on Facebook. Here's what's coming up next.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Natalie Henderson, the Chief Schools Officer for Indianapolis Public Schools, and today I am going to be teaching the 4th grade reading I Ready lesson beginning on pages 11 and 12. Sometimes when we read, we come across words that we don't know. Sometimes those words are When we read, we come into contact with words that we don't know and are unfamiliar to us. And sometimes we don't understand how those meanings fit into the sentence. And so today we're going to refer to those. No, I gotta start again. Okay. When we read, we come into contact with many words that we know and some that are familiar to us, but sometimes we come across a word that we don't know, and we need to figure out what that unusual word means, because we don't see it in our text regularly. And so we're going to use a skill called context clues to help us figure out words that we don't typically know. And so our learning target for today is students will use context clues to figure out the meaning of unfamiliar words. Now this is probably a review lesson for you. I know that this is a skill that is covered in 3rd grade, and when you get to 5th grade, you'll also practice with context clues. But for today, we're going to focus on 3 different types of context clues. And these are all strategies that good readers use in order to discover the meaning of unfamiliar words. So what are the 3 types of context clues? The first type that we're going to learn today is example. The second one is a definition, and the third is restatement. And so I want to make sure that you have your I Ready grade 4 I Ready reading packet for the lesson that we're going to do today. So when I say there are 3 different types of context clues, and there are actually way more, but we're just going to focus on 3 today, I want to give us some examples of one. So one type of context clue is an example. And so this sentence says, the weather in the South is so humid that when I go outside during the day, my skin gets sticky and the air feels heavy. Dr. Henderson left off her punctuation. So I've underlined the word in this sentence that is unfamiliar to me, humid. I'm not quite sure what it means. I've not seen it before in some of the texts that I've read. And so now I want to figure out, what does this word mean? So one first step is to reread the sentence. The weather in the South is so humid that when I go outside during the day, my skin gets sticky and the air feels heavy. Where there are some words in that sentence that I know. I know when my skin gets sticky, I can imagine what that feels like. And when the air is heavy and it's weighing on me. And outside, so these are all words that I know that are giving me some clues. And these are also an example. So the author in this sentence gave me some clues about what the word humid might mean. So when I'm outside, my skin gets sticky and the air feels heavy. So that lets me know that it's a word that means that the weather feels very heavy. Another example of a context clue is the definition. Sometimes the author will give you the definition of the word in the text. So if we read this sentence, I love wearing moccasins. That's the word I'm not familiar with, so it's underlined. A pair of flat shoes made out of leather whenever I feel like relaxing. So if moccasins are my unfamiliar word, and I'm rereading the sentence, I love wearing moccasins, a pair of flat shoes. So, okay, that's one clue. Made out of leather, whenever I feel like relaxing, the author has provided a definition in this text of what the word moccasin means. Okay, that's our second type of context clue. And then the third type of context clue is a restatement. Let's read this sentence. Mark left the field in despair, my unfamiliar word, so I have it underlined. He was sure he would never be able to play basketball again, and that thought made him so sad that he wanted to cry. All right, so despair is my unfamiliar word. I'm rereading the sentence. Mark left the field in despair. He was sure he would never be able to play basketball again, and that thought made him so sad he wanted to cry. And I'm looking for some clues in this text. So looks like he might not be able to play basketball, and gosh, basketball is such a fun sport. The thought of not being able to play basketball made him want to cry, so that would mean that he's sad. And so between those clues, he would never be able to play basketball again, and the thought of that made him sad, he wanted to cry, that lets me know that despair is a feeling, and it's not a happy feeling. And so by the author restating in this particular text what despair might mean, that helped me figure it out. And so these are three examples of an example context clue, a definition context clue, and a restatement. Now let's take a look in our packet and see what examples are there. So in your iReady grade 4 reading packet, I want you to turn to page 11. It looks like this. And again, it mentions context clues. And so we see a table there, and the table has kinds of context clues: definition, example, and restatement, just like I have here on the board. So let's read the example. Look for a definition in the text. In high school, Jim Lovell built his first rocket. Rocket is our underlined word, a jet engine that could fly to great heights. So just like in our example on the board, the definition of what a rocket is right there for you. A rocket is a jet engine that could fly to great heights. Look at the next line of the table. Find an example that will give you clues about the word's meaning. Lovell's first attempt was a failure. That is our underlined word. His rocket flew into the air, but then exploded and crashed. And so if we look at that sentence and we looked at the clues, exploded and crash would probably be a bad thing if we were in a rocket. And so that lets us know that the underlined word failure, it gives us some clues about that meaning, that it was not a success. And then the third line, look for a restatement. A restatement happens when the word is discussed in a way that makes its meaning clear. A rocket is pushed upward by materials that are combustible. In your packet, combustible is underlined, and then you see the word, these materials burn and release gases. So reading through and figuring out by the context clue of restatement, the author has told me what combustible means. It means burning and releasing gas. And so those are three more examples, just like we did on the whiteboard. And so if you move down to page 11, we have some guided practice. We need to read the paragraph below and circle the context clues that will help understand the meaning of the underlined word. So I'm going to pause so you can take a second to read through the guided practice. Okay. Have you read it? Okay, so let's take a look. There are three words that are underlined in the guided practice: fascinated, rejected, and persistent. Do you have those words? And you were asked to circle words in the text that would help you figure out what fascinated means. So what did you circle? Jim Lovell has always been fascinated by rockets. He was interested in learning everything about them, and Jim Lovell has always been fascinated by rockets. He was interested in learning everything about them and even built his own rocket. So what did you circle? I'm going to circle interested in learning everything about them. Does that work for you? So if somebody is fascinated, I circled interested in learning everything about them as my clue. Put that on the first line beside the word fascinated. Let's keep going. Lovell applied to United States Naval Academy but was rejected. After failing to get into the academy, Lovell did not give up. So we see the second word, rejected, that's underlined. What did you circle to help you figure out the clues for rejected? I circled after failing to get into the academy. Did you circle that? So then you put those words on the line beside rejected. After failing to get into the academy, Lovell did not give up. He persisted or kept trying and finally succeeded. After the academy, he joined the NASA space program. So the last underlined word is persisted. What did you circle to help you figure out what the word persisted meant? I circled or kept trying. And then you write that on the bottom of the line beside persisted. Did everybody get those same answers as me? Hope so. Next, turn to page 12. Looks like this in your packet. So this one is you're going to do on your own. You're going to read the same text in the box, and then you're going to answer questions 1 through 4 using the context clues of either an example, definition, or restatement to help you figure out what the word means. So I'm going to read it out loud for you. NASA chose Lovell to command the Apollo 13 space mission. Command is our underlined word. Lovell was in charge of 2 men and of making all final decisions. After they were in space for a little more than 2 days, Lovell and his crew ran into trouble. One of the oxygen tanks blew up. The explosion caused a leak in another tank. Explosion is underlined. And now there wouldn't be enough oxygen for a moon landing. Lovell and his crew had to return to Earth. Their safe return was due to Lovell's capable leadership. And capable was underlined. So now you have 4 questions to answer. And so you think back to the 3 different types of context clues, example, definition, or restatement, to help you figure out what the words that are underlined meant. So for number 1, what does the word command mean? And you have 4 options: to study, to fly with others, to be at the head of, or to be part of. So if we go back and find command in that sentence, that first sentence, and we're going to reread it to see if there are any clues in that sentence. NASA chose Lovell to command the Apollo 13 space mission. I don't see any clues in that sentence. I'm going to go to the next one. Lovell was in charge of 2 men and of making all final decisions. There's some clues in those sentences. I think that it helped. So was in charge of 2 men and making all final decisions are going to be my clues, and I think those are restatements. And so I'm going to go to question number 1, and based on my clues of was in charge of 2 men and making all final decisions, I think the answer is C. The word command means to be at the head of. Are you following along with me at home? Let's go to number 2. What words helped you understand the meaning of command? Oh, we just said this when we thought out loud. So it gives the options of in charge of, 2 men, space mission, and chose Lovell. And so think back, when I read the second sentence, Lovell was in charge of 2 men and of making all final decisions. The words that I said were clues for me was in charge of 2 men. And so if we look down at the options we have for number 2, the letter A is in charge of. All right, let's go to number 3. What does the word explosion mean? So let's go back into our text and find that sentence. The explosion caused a leak in another tank, and now there wouldn't be enough oxygen for a moon landing. All right, that sentence, I don't see any clues. Let me read the sentence after it. Lovell and his crew had to return to Earth. No, I don't see any clues there. I don't see a restatement of explosion. I don't see an example or definition. Let's read the sentence before that sentence. One of the oxygen tanks blew up. I think we have our clue. Blew up. So the explosion caused the leak, and the sentence before it said one of the oxygen tanks blew up. So what does the word explosion mean? Well, my clue of blew up, and I look at the options, a leak, a bursting of something, a lack of oxygen, or leaving outer space. Answer choice B matches blew up, a bursting of something. Let's go to number 4. What does the word capable suggest about Lovell as a leader? Let's go back to our text and read the sentence again. Their safe return was due to Lovell's capable leadership. Okay, I don't see any clues. Maybe safe return might be a clue, but I'm not sure. Let's read the sentence before. Lovell and his crew had to return to Earth. Their safe return was due to Lovell's capable leadership. I'm really stuck on this one. Let's see what my option choices are. What does the word capable suggest about Lovell as a leader? He is A, gentle and patient leader. He is skillful at leading others. He is harsh to those he leads. He is weak when leading others. If I go back to our text and think about some of the clues, so we know that he was in charge. That was one of the clues that helped us get the answer for number 1. We know that they had a safe return due to his capable leadership. So because of him, they got to return safely. And so if I think of the options that are listed here, I would say that the answer might be answer B. He is skillful at leading others, because we know he was in charge and he made all of the final decisions from the text, and we know that they were able to return safely because of his leadership. So I would say the answer is B. He is skillful at leading others. And that is the end of our lesson on pages 11 through 12 in the iReady 4th grade Reading at Home kit.
This is MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23. Here's what's coming up next.
Good morning, this is Dr. Henderson, the Chief Schools Officer for Indianapolis Public Schools, and today we're going to focus on the 4th grade ELA iReady 4th grade, Good morning, this is Dr. Natalie Henderson, the Chief Schools Officer for Indianapolis Public Schools, and today we are going to focus on the grade 4 Reading iReady at Home Learning Kit lesson beginning on pages 13 and 14. This is the second lesson on context clues. And the previous lesson, you learned about 3 different types of context clues: definition, example, and restatement. And today we're going to learn 2 more, antonym and synonym context clues. Behind me, I have our learning target. Students will use context clues to figure out the meaning of unfamiliar words. So again, sometimes when we read text, we come across words that we don't know, and the skill of using clues to figure out what the word means are context clues. And so antonyms and synonyms, these are words that I know are familiar to you. You've probably been learning about them since you were in 1st and 2nd grade. Antonym typically means the opposite of a word, and synonym means the same. And so when we think about context clues that are antonyms or synonyms, we are looking for clues within the sentence, in the same sentence as the word we don't know, or before or after that is the opposite. And so let's take a look at some examples. So one example of an antonym context clue, and let's read this sentence. The mall was humongous. Underlined humongous because that's a word I'm not familiar with. I don't see it a lot of times when I read my text. The mall was humongous, not like the tiny department store we have in our town. And so antonyms, remember, are the opposite. And so we're not quite sure what humongous is, but let's see. If we reread the sentence, do we see any clues? The mall was humongous, not like the tiny. Okay, tiny. That's a word that describes a department store, and I know what that means. Tiny means small. So what might be an opposite word of small? Well, I know what we have in our town means. I know what a mall is. So the other word that I'm not sure of is humongous. So I'm thinking it must be the opposite of tiny. And so that lets me know that the mall is really, really big. So that is an antonym context clue. Let's take a look at the next example, a synonym context clue. There are about 200 different species, that's our unfamiliar word, that's why it's underlined, or kinds of reptiles that live in this forest. Okay, so rereading the sentence and I'm looking for clues. There are about 200 different species, so 200, that's a lot. I know different or kinds. Okay, I know what that word means. Kinds, like kinds of ice cream, kinds of shoes, of reptiles. Reptile is an academic term I see in science, so that's like snakes and frogs and things like that. And the forest, and I know what that word means. So what clues can I think of? Species or kinds. So I know that there are 200 different, and if I cover up this word, 200 different kinds, okay, let me think about ice cream. Okay, so there could be 200 different kinds of ice cream. So I wonder if, in that example, if kind is the same or similar to the word species. And if I read there are about 200 different, if I take the word out and I read it with just kinds, there are about 200 different kinds of reptiles that live in this forest. That makes sense. So I think that using the synonym or the same kind of word for species is kinds, and that helps me figure out what the word means. And so those are two more different types of context clues that you can use to figure out the meanings of unfamiliar words. So let's take a look at your page 13. It looks like this. And let's read. Oh, they have a learning target written there too, and is very similar to what Dr. Henderson has on the board. And then it wants us to read about informational text. So pull out your packet and read it with me. Informational texts often have words that people don't use in everyday life. Some words usually appear only in text in one subject area. For example, you'll see the word fossil in science texts and the word geography in social studies texts. Other words called academic words are useful in many subject areas. For example, the academic word process often appears in both science and social studies texts. As you read, you can use context clues, again, that's what we're focusing on today, to figure out the meanings of unfamiliar words and phrases. Clues might be synonyms and antonyms, which we have here, or examples or definitions. And in your first lesson on page 11 and 12, we talked about examples and definitions. So let's read the passage on the bottom of the page and circle the phrase conceived of and underline the context clues that help you learn its meaning. So I'm going to circle the phrase conceived of, read this and see if we can figure out what it means. Inventing the crane. Ancient Greek engineers thought of ways to make new machines from older ones. For example, they conceived of and built a compound machine called the crane. Their idea combined the lever, pulley, and wheel and axle into one machine. And then there's a nice picture of what the modern crane compound machine looks like. And so if we think back, what subject area do you think this text is from? Inventing the crane, and we're talking about the lever, pulley, and wheel and axle into one machine. As I look at some of those academic words, lever and pulley and wheel and axle, it makes me think of things we learned in science class. So this is a text that is probably useful in science class. So did you circle the word conceived of? And did you underline some context clues to help you learn what it's meaning? So I'm going to take a second and try to underline some context clues that I see. All right, so if we turn the page to page 14, we have another task to do. We need to think, what have we learned about figuring out the meaning of unfamiliar words? Complete the chart below to figure out the meaning of the phrase conceived of as it is used in this passage. Then explain what the phrase most likely means, okay? All right, so if we take a look, I have drawn on our board like a little table that looks like the paper. We have a column for helpful context, a column for clues, and a column for possible meaning. So what did we underline as helpful context? I underlined, if you go back and look at the text, I underlined their idea combined the lever, the pulley, and the wheel and axle into one machine. So I'm going to write that here. behind the lever, pulley, and wheel axle. And I'm not going to write the whole thing. I'm going to draw 3 dots that mean the rest that followed would go there, okay? So that was my helpful context. What would be my clue? So if I think back to either an antonym clue or a synonym clue, I now have to go back and read into my sentence. Do I see a synonym or potentially an antonym for the word that we didn't know, which was conceived of? Well, I think that in this, that is synonym would be my context clues. When I read my sentence, their idea, I know what idea means, and it says that their idea combined helped make the machine. So I'm going to say my clue is a synonym clue. And I'm going to put synonym, and I hope that I spell it correctly. Because I know what that means. I know what it means to have an idea, and when I read about characters or in text about people having ideas. So if the word idea is my synonym, so conceived of, it's kind of the same thing like idea, what could that possibly mean? So I think it means that you came up with an idea. So have you filled out your chart at home on your page 14? So if the possible meaning is came up with an idea, our synonym context clue of words meaning same or similar, what do we think that the meaning of the phrase is? And that is the last sentence under your table. I think, you ready for based off of your chart, that the meaning of conceived of is thought of or came up with something like an idea or an invention. And so we were super close with our table. And so now you have, in addition to definition, example, restatement, you also have antonym and synonym are potential ways to use context clues to figure out the meaning of unfamiliar words.
You can achieve a lot using your imagination. I mean, I don't like to brag, but... Wait, who's that? And why is she all over these achievement awards? But with STEM, the sky's the limit. Shaboom! Use STEM to envision... Okay, I'm seeing it. Yeah! Invent...
Got any ideas?
I've got a few, actually. And create a better world.
Told you she's super smart.
If she can STEM, so can you. Find out more at She Can STEM.
Our hearts are made stronger by how we treat others.
Put her there.
The light you share can impact those around you, but so can the darkness.
Later, twerps.
Did Pete saying mean things bother ya?
So when you reach out to another person, take a moment to consider how they will feel and let your heart be the key to making a difference. Because of you, someone's entire day, year, or even life can change.
In every heart, there's hope.
Crooked teeth may embarrass kids whose families can't afford braces, and trying to fix their teeth themselves can make things worse. Luckily, there's Donated Orthodontic Services, a program from the American Association of Orthodontists. For children and teens who qualify and are matched with a volunteer orthodontist, treatment can be life-changing and help them smile with confidence. Learn more at aaoinfo.org.
This is MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23. Here's what's coming up next.
My name is Mrs. Lopez, and I'm one of your teachers for this virtual lesson experience. I live in Buckeye, Arizona, and have been teaching for 7 years, 3 years in grade 5. Our family plays lots of baseball, so I'm very excited for this new lesson. Let's pause and take a minute to remind yourself of our expectations. Be ready to think, share your ideas, look forward to learning, and try to stay focused. Congratulations on completing Welcome Module. In the Welcome Module lessons, we practice using the content stages with a work of art and work through the craft stages to improve our writing. Now we are going to begin Grade 5 Module 4, entitled Breaking Barriers. This module centers on the power of sports to bring people together, to challenge injustices, and to provide hope for the future. I'm excited to get learning with Lesson 1 of Grade 5, Module 4. In this lesson, you will need a pencil, your journal, and handout 1A, Background on Nelson Mandela and Apartheid in South Africa. If you do not have the handout, it's okay. We'll be reading it on the screen as well. As you know, every module has an essential question. This is the big question that gives us the purpose for our learning. During the Welcome module, you explored the question, how will we learn together virtually? Our essential question for Module 4 is, how can sports influence individuals and societies? Over the course of this module, we will build knowledge on our topic by reading, thinking, and writing about different texts. We will be able to answer the essential question at the end of the module. Let's go ahead and look at one of the words in this question, the word influence. Influence, to affect someone or something in an important way. This is a new word, and what we are going to start is a vocabulary page in our journal. So flip to a new page and title it Vocabulary Page. If you don't have a journal and just using paper, it's okay. Grab a separate piece of paper and title that vocabulary page. You'll want to write down the word influence and underline it. Then follow with adding the definition next to it. It's okay if you use more than one line. We will continue adding to this vocabulary page throughout our lesson today and throughout our module. Feel free to pause the video to take a minute to write this down. Each Wit and Wisdom module is divided into several sets of lessons. Each set of lessons helps us focus on and build knowledge about the different aspects of our topic. A focusing question will guide our learning for each set of lessons. Our first focusing question for Module 4 is, how can sports affect the way we view others? At the end of this set of lessons, we'll have learned and thought about new ideas, and we will be able to answer this question. I'm excited about the content and ideas we get to explore together in this first set of lessons in Module 4. Let's start first with a short prompt. Nelson Mandela, the president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999, once said, "Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. Answer the following question either with a partner or in your journal. Do you think these statements are true? Why or why not? Go ahead and pause the video and either talk to someone or answer this in your response journal. Great. Now we're also going to create another new page, a timeline page. So pick another spot in your journal and we're going to create the timeline page. You want to draw a line from the top to the bottom and at the top label it 2020. Then skip a few lines down and add 1994 to 1999. And next to that, you'll write Nelson Mandela was the president of South Africa. We will be using this timeline throughout the module to show you different time periods that we will be looking at. Go ahead and pause the video and write that down. Nelson Mandela was the former president of South Africa who died in 2013. He spoke about the power of sports at the 2000 Laureus World Sports Awards, a ceremony held each year to celebrate the achievements in sports around the world. We are going to be listening to a clip from his speech, Nelson Mandela's speech that changed the world.
Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair.
After listening to Nelson Mandela's words, can you think of a time where sports have influenced you? If you have somebody to share with, please feel free to share with them. Now that you've had a chance to share with someone, let's talk about today's work. The distill, our content framing question. This is the daily question that we'll be able to answer. What is the essential meaning of the documentary about Nelson Mandela and South Africa's 1995 Rugby World Cup victory? Today you will watch a short documentary film based on actual people and events. The first time you watch it, you will listen carefully to notice and wonder about Nelson Mandela and the momentous event when South Africa's team won the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Rugby is a team sport much like American football, in which players kick, carry, and pass from hand to hand an oval-shaped ball. First, let's look at a word that we need to know. Let's build some background knowledge on the topic for the documentary. This word is apartheid. What word parts do you recognize that might offer clues about the meaning of the word apartheid? A means away or from, apart, away from each other. We are going to notice and wonder about the passage on handout 1A. If you do not have handout 1A, no worries. We have it here up for you to follow along. This is background on Nelson Mandela and the apartheid in South Africa. South Africa's history. Like most African countries, South Africa was originally the home of Black African tribes. In the 1400s, white Europeans arrived in what is today known as South Africa on their way to the Far East. In the mid-1600s, white settlers from the Netherlands established the city of Cape Town on the southern coast of Africa and began settling there. In the 1800s, Great Britain took over control of Cape Town, and in the early 1900s, the white British government created the country of South Africa. Remember to notice and wonder during each section. If you have somebody to share, feel free to pause and share with them what you've noticed. Apartheid. Apartheid, meaning apartness, was a system created by the all-white government of South Africa in 1948 that separated the people based on their race and skin color. Under apartheid, Black, mixed race, and other non-white South Africans, the majority of the country's people did not have the same rights as white South Africans. Life under apartheid. White and non-white South Africans were forced to live in separate areas, attend separate schools, and use separate public facilities such as restrooms, buses, park benches, and even beaches. Black South Africans were not allowed to vote, nor marry white South Africans. Many Black South Africans and people of other racial groups were forced out of their homes and forced to live in areas designated as homelands. Again, remember you can pause the video and share your notice and wonders. Nelson Mandela and the fight against apartheid. During the 1950s and 1960s, groups began to unite to protest apartheid and fight for equal rights for all Southern Africans. Nelson Mandela, a lawyer, led one of these groups, the African National Congress, in the fight against apartheid. The South African government treated protesters harshly, even peaceful protesters. Many protesters were put in prison. Some were even sentenced to death. In 1962, Mandela was arrested and sentenced to prison for life. Mandela's arrest brought international attention to South Africa, and Mandela himself became a symbol for the fight against apartheid. In 1989, under pressure from countries around the world, South Africa began to take steps to end apartheid. The government created a new constitution which gave equal rights to all citizens of South Africa. In 1990, after 27 years, Mandela was released from prison. He was elected President of South Africa in 1994. Now take a moment to think about the knowledge you have gained from this article. Next, we are going to be learning about Nelson Mandela in South Africa in a documentary. Take out your vocabulary page and let's add a new word. Documentary. Remember to underline the word when you've written it down and write the definition next to your word. A film based on real people, places, and events. A documentary documents or captures reality. The purpose of a documentary is to tell a specific story about a particular subject. A document is much like nonfiction reading, but you are using your eyes and ears to watch and listen. We will be practicing to listening and watch to understand what the story of a filmmaker is telling us. In a few moments, we will watch a short documentary film clip about Nelson Mandela and South Africa's 1995 Rugby World Cup victory. In the documentary, it opens up in 1994, the year that Nelson Mandela was elected president of South Africa. Remember from our reading that only 4 years before he had been released from prison after serving 27 years for protesting apartheid, the system created by the all-white South African government in 1948 to separate people based on their race. Now, many South Africans hope that President Nelson Mandela could bring the country together. However, in 1994, the country was still deeply divided. Many white South Africans did not want apartheid to end. Some fought violently against efforts to give black and white South Africans equal rights. When the documentary opens in May of 1994, racial violence and tensions between black and white South Africans had reached a tipping point. Go ahead and create a notice and wonder chart in your journal. Remember, that is creating a T and then putting notice on the left side, I notice, and I wonder on the right side. And as you watch the film, jot down what you notice about the documentary and what you wonder about the documentary. What do you see and what kind of questions do you still have? Let's watch our documentary.
Now we will watch a short documentary clip filmed by Scott Duncan about Nelson Mandela. This documentary was featured at the 2009 ESPN ESPY Awards. At this award ceremony, Mandela won the Arthur Ashe Award for Courage for his work to unite his country through sports.
As the violence intensified, Mandela rallied international support to bring the 1995 Rugby World Cup to South Africa, determined to use the world stage to unite his nation. But he was taking a risk because rugby and the South African national team, the Springboks, had long been associated with the very worst of the country's history.
In South Africa, rugby was the white man's game. I hated rugby, I hated those ones who were playing rugby, and I hated the Springboks even more.
Rugby is a sport of brute force, and as such, rugby in many ways symbolised apartheid oppression with which black people were being kept down.
But now the man called Madiba by his followers was set on making peace with his former oppressors. He would become a rugby fan, but convincing black South Africans to stand behind the long-hated Springboks would not be easy. You see this cup that I'm wearing? I ask you all to stand behind them because they are our pride.
Here is the man wanting us to reconcile with these brutish people who have humiliated us for ages in our own country. I wasn't going to be persuaded even by the great Madiba to support the Springboks.
As the World Cup approached, Mandela repeated his message of one team, one country in townships and villages across South Africa. Moved by Mandela's support, the Springbok players visited the Robben Island prison, where Mandela had been jailed for nearly 3 decades.
You go to the cell and you realize he sat here for how many years? I remember James Moore standing in the corner and there were tears running down his cheeks.
It was quite amazing to experience just for a few moments what a man experienced for a lifetime. You didn't really understand how big this whole thing was until we saw that.
That also made us realize that, what we were doing was a little bit more than just playing a game.
Well, who would have believed that South Africa would beat Australia, world champions?
The underdog Springboks, newly inspired, began a magical run through the tournament.
And that's it. South Africa have beaten France in this World Cup semi-final.
But as the team advanced, something even more improbable happened. Black South Africans started to stand behind the national team.
We started realizing that, you know what, this is our country, this is our brothers, we all have to be behind them.
People understood that we're a fledgling democracy, we're on show together. Please show the world that we're doing all right.
One team, one country. That was Mandela's vision. And on the morning of the final game, blacks and whites alike were swept up into a shared frenzy of excitement. As Mandela drove to Ellis Park Stadium, he saw firsthand what just weeks ago had been unimaginable.
We had a lot of white people driving past us, booting and fists out of the... And normally you'd have the fists out of anger, but these was fists of jubilation.
On all the lights, on all the freeways, you had these enormous flags. Everywhere was just the World Cup, the World Cup.
Beneath the stadium, the Springboks prepared, knowing they would never play a more important game. Moments before they took the field, the silent tension in the locker room was broken.
The door opened, and in walked Nelson Mandela. Nobody knew they was coming to visit us.
He walks in, and he's beaming.
Here's the #1 citizen of our country, a black man, wearing a Springbok jersey.
Never in our wildest dreams did we ever expect him to wear a Springbok on his heart.
It was a very, very strong motivator in terms of where we were going and what we had to achieve.
We now down to the big game, and the two great rivals of New Zealand and South Africa out in the middle at Ellis Park.
Tied 12-12 after regulation, the match remains one of the epic finals in rugby history. As play headed to overtime, Mandela sat in the president's box, his great experiment hanging in the balance.
One of the best days, Stransky looks for the drop. Has he got it? Yes, it's over. That is it. The final whistle in South Africa win this Rugby World Cup final, and what a dramatic finish for the host country.
I don't think I've ever seen so many grown men on the rugby field cry.
After the win, Nelson Mandela, wearing the symbol of his former enemies, prepared to step onto the field.
The crowd just went wild.
It was like a volcano erupting.
I'm trying to understand what the chant is. And I realized that these white South African people were chanting their president's name.
This is Nelson.
Nelson, Nelson.
Nelson, 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 Nelson. That was one voice.
I never thought that we would hear that at a rugby stadium. At the time, I think it was just fantastic.
We didn't know what hit us. I mean, it was just the most phenomenal. It was really quite incredible.
The image of a joyous Mandela celebrating with the national team was mirrored in every corner of the once broken country. South Africans at last were rejoicing as one.
Then we had 65,000 South Africans here today. Tremendous support.
David, we didn't have 60,000 South Africans. We had 43 million South Africans.
It was freedom all over. The moment that the cup was handed over to Madiba, I told myself, these are people that I have to build this country together. There's one South African. All my hatred is going to gain me absolutely nothing.
Madiba took my hand and he shook it and he said, "Thank you very much for what you've done for South Africa." I said, "Madiba, you got it wrong. Thank you for what you've done for South Africa."
I think it was great vision from the man to have used that opportunity to make us see each other as human beings. This is our South Africa.
Now that you've completed watching the video, let's go over your notice and wonders. Did you notice Nelson Mandela was in prison and then came out to be the country's president? I wonder if this has ever happened before. Did you notice or wonder about the rugby team going in to visit at the prison and how emotional this was for them? Nelson Mandela, how he supported the team. And do you wonder why he did that? Today we have noticed and wondered about Nelson Mandela and South Africa's 1995 Rugby World Cup victory. In the next lesson, we will deepen our understanding of how Nelson Mandela influenced the people of South Africa. This wraps up our lesson for today. It was fun being with you, and I look forward to our next lesson. If you have any questions, please reach out to info@greatminds.org. Every child is capable of greatness. Until next time.
Because of you, I felt hopeless.
I know it was a joke, but it still hurt me.
Because of you, I felt wanted and not alone in this world.
Because you said hi to me on the first day of school, I felt included and I knew that I was going to be okay.
You're watching MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23, a free educational service provided by Circle City Broadcasting of Indianapolis. Here's what's coming up this hour. Get more information, special announcements, and weekly program schedules online at wishtv.com. And be sure to follow us on Facebook. Here's what's coming up next.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, I'm Sarah Hutchison, and I am an English as a second language coach with the district in IPS, and it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon to bring a lesson to our sixth graders in the district. I hope that you guys who are watching are all safe and happy in your homes, and you are ready to work on lesson 1 with me today. So here we go. Lesson 1 is going to be about varying sentence patterns. And so if you are looking in your packet, we are going to be on page 10 of the sixth grade packet. Like I said, we're going to do varying sentence patterns. And so the reason we're doing this is because when we write, we need to have a good sense of variety in our writing, because if we don't, it's going to be a little bit boring. And so let me illustrate what I mean to you. So what does variety mean, or what does vary mean, first of all? So vary means to make different or change. And so when we say varying sentence patterns, we want to make them different. What is the reason for that? Well, let me say something that might help it illustrate it for you. So I want you to imagine that sentences in a paragraph are kind of like musical notes in a song, right? And so if we have a song that goes like this, actually write it up here. Okay, so here's a song that I just made up, and it goes like this. Ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. That's pretty repetitive, right? And it might be kind of boring if we just had an entire song that went ba-dum, 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 ba-dum over and over, right? So we need to vary it up a little bit. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Beethoven. He had a Fifth Symphony, and I'm going to play a little bit of that for you now, just so you can see what I mean by varying it up or changing it up. Okay, so I wanted you to just listen to that first part because it didn't go ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. It went bum, 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 right? So it was almost like it went bum, 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 bum. And that note at the end was what Beethoven used to vary or change up the song a little bit, right? And that makes it more interesting. So I know that we're not all sitting around listening to Beethoven every day, right? You're probably listening to lots of different kind of music on your Spotify or something like I am, and I enjoy lots of different music. But what I really enjoy is that there is variety or variation. Those are all forms of the word vary, and that means change or difference, right? And so if we can think about sentences in a paragraph like musical notes in a song, then we don't want our writing to be boring, right? So we need to vary it up or change it up a little bit, okay? And so that's what this lesson is all about. What are some ways that we can actually vary our sentence patterns or our structures that we use to make them more interesting, okay? So I have some up here, and I'm actually gonna start with this green one in the middle. So on your packet, or in your packet, excuse me, if you look at the beginning where it says introduction, it says some different suggestions, and I've written them up here. So it says, good writers use a variety of sentence types. They mix short and long sentences, and they find different ways to start sentences. Here are ways to improve your writing. So if we're trying to be better writers, which we all should be, right? We want to do something like using different sentence types, and these are different sentence types. So we have statements, which a statement is really just another word for a sentence with a period. Questions, I'm sorry, I mixed these two up according to the packet, but we'll go with this. Questions, so you might ask a question of your readers. Imperative, which imperative is kind of a hard one to remember, but I just always think of imperative as being sort of a command, like you're telling your reader to do something, right? So I might say, go to the party, like because it was really fun, right? So I might suggest to them that they do that in my writing. Exclamation is the last one, and so I might tell them, wow, the party was so fun and exciting, right? That's an exclamation, and usually we use these two punctuation marks there, right? Usually a statement and an imperative has a period. So those are sentence types, so we might use those to vary our writing a bit. Another thing that we can do if you are looking on your packet, the second one is use different sentence structures. So structures are these over here. So we have simple sentences, compound, complex, and compound, complex, right? And so you're probably like me when I was in 6th grade. What are those again? Okay, so let me explain to you what they are really quickly. So a simple sentence, I'm going to give you an example, okay, that actually comes from the reading that is in your packet. So a simple sentence would be, we went on an impressive field trip. Okay, so it has a subject and it has a predicate which contains a verb. A compound sentence would be, the building itself was huge and it was filled with exhibits. So a compound sentence is really two simple sentences joined together by the word and. And I'm going to come back to those sentences that I'm telling you in just a minute here. Complex. Complex is something that includes An independent clause or a simple sentence, that's the same thing, and also a dependent clause. So a dependent clause is something that cannot stand by itself as a sentence. A good example of that, I'm going to write, actually I have it down here, so I'll write it down here. Okay, so sometimes I might start a sentence. Might need a capital letter there, Sarah. Okay, at some point, blah, 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 right? So for example, at some point then, be sure to visit the museum, because our story here is about a museum. So this cannot exist by itself. It's not a sentence by itself. You would never just say to somebody, at some point, right? Because they're like, at some point what, right? So as long as you don't have a verb or a subject there, you're going to go, oh, that's a dependent clause. And so what a complex sentence is a dependent clause and or plus a simple sentence. Okay? And then the most complicated or complex one of all is compound complex, which really puts these two together. So remember, this one had to be joined by a conjunction like and. Okay? So a compound complex example might have a dependent clause and it might have two simple sentences in it. So an example would be, although I don't usually like museums that much, I liked this one a lot since it was filled with exhibits. Okay? And that kind of goes along with our story. So we'll come back to those in just a minute. The last thing that is on your sheet there is sometimes begin a sentence with a prepositional phrase or a dependent clause. So in order to do that, I might use words like, I wish I had some students here because they could probably give me some prepositions. Like an example preposition is in, on, under. Usually they tell the names of places, right? So sometimes to make a sentence interesting, we want to use a prepositional phrase. And so I have one here that I wrote. In the huge building, comma, there were many exhibits. Okay? And so that could be more interesting if we would start a sentence with a prepositional phrase. We can also start a sentence with a dependent clause, which is, for example, next time I go, or at some point, remember I said earlier, next time I go, I wonder if the exhibits will be different. Okay, that could be an example. So let's go back to our packet. We're going to take a look here and do a little bit of guided practice. You guys are doing great. If you're sticking with me through all of these explanations, you are doing wonderful. So let's keep it up here. So they have a draft there in your packet, and it says, draft. We went on an impressive field trip. We went to the Science Museum. The building was huge. It had many exhibits. I especially liked the laser exhibit. You should be sure to visit the museum. That draft sounded a little bit to me like but-um, because it was like the building was huge, Science Museum, I liked the exhibits. It was very kind of blah. So we want to make it a little bit more interesting and add some variety. The revision shows us that our field trip to the Science Museum really impressed me. The building itself was huge, and it was filled with exhibits. Do you dream of seeing actual lasers? At some point, then, be sure to visit the museum. You won't be sorry. That, to me, had a lot of variation, right? Just like our song earlier. So what are some of the things that I could pull out of that revision? The first sentence, our field trip to the Science Museum really impressed me. That's a good example of a statement, right? It is also an example of a simple sentence. The building, the second sentence, the building itself was huge and it was filled with exhibits. That is an example of a compound sentence because they put two simple sentences together and joined it by and. Okay? Another, let me see if there's any, oh yes, that was also an example of a statement. Do you dream of seeing actual lasers? Question, right? At some point then, be sure to visit the museum. Dependent clause that started that sentence, right? And so that makes it more interesting. Also, that is a really good example of a compound complex sentence because it started with a dependent clause and it had two simple sentences in there. Last sentence in that paragraph is, you won't be sorry, right? And so they used an exclamation there as well as a simple sentence. And so we have lots of different examples on this page. So I think right now we should probably go through a little bit of guided practice and see if we can do these 3 questions at the bottom of page 10 together. Are you ready? Are you with me? Okay, let's do this. I do see on the left side that there's a hint, so I think I'm going to make sure that we read that real quick. Hint. When a sentence begins with a dependent clause, use a comma to separate it from the main clause. When a sentence begins with a prepositional phrase, usually use a comma after the phrase. And so I'm going to give you an example of that really quickly. So I said, I'm going to write it up here real fast. I'm going to write my prepositional phrase sentence up here. So we're still talking about the museum, right? Excuse my messy handwriting. Exhibits. Okay. Okay, so this is an example of what they're talking about in the hint. This is a prepositional phrase right here. In the huge building, comma, there were many exhibits, right? And so they want to make sure that you know, usually when you use a prepositional phrase, there'll be a comma after it. And when you use a dependent clause, right? And so we just want to make sure, we just want to make sure that we are paying attention to that when we do our guided practice here. Okay? So go down to number 1 with me and let's read it out loud. So number 1 says, change this sentence to a question. It is fun to learn about insect colonies. I'm sure that we can come up with a more interesting way to say that. I could turn it around and I could say, learning about insect colonies is fun. That's one way I could do it. What else could I do? I might be able to use a question and I might be able to say, do you love to learn about insect colonies as much as I do? Question mark. So those are just a couple of examples and I'm sure you can come up with your own as well. Number 2, use the word when to combine these sentences. I looked at the museum map. I noticed a new insect exhibit. I might have to actually put the second sentence first in this case. So I might say something like, I'm sorry, actually I wouldn't do that. I would put the first sentence first. I would say, when I looked at the museum map, I noticed a new insect exhibit. And so that would be an example of this dependent clause here, because I would say, when I looked at the museum map, comma, I noticed a new insect exhibit. I almost made a mistake there, but that's okay because we're all learning, right? So sometimes even teachers make mistakes. Number 3, combine these sentences so that the new sentence begins with a prepositional phrase. So that's this up here. Here are 2 sentences. It was near the entrance to the exhibit. The first thing I saw was a giant grasshopper. Let's see, how can I combine? I've got an example. Not sure if this is going to be the best one, but I could say, I could say, in the entrance to the exhibit, comma, the first thing I saw was a giant grasshopper. And then I'm using my preposition in. I bet you can come up with a much better sentence than that, though. So I'm going to leave you to it. I hope that this, has been a helpful lesson for you, and that you will start varying your sentence patterns when you write, because it really makes your writing interesting, just like all that music we all love to listen to. So thank you for being with me today. Please stay safe and happy and healthy in your homes, practice social distancing, you know, all of those things, and wash your hands. And we will see you back soon in IPS schools, and we miss you. Thank you.
This is MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23. Here's what's coming up next.
Hello, boys and girls at home. My name is Jessica Dunn. I'm the Interim Curriculum and Instructional Officer for Indianapolis Public Schools. Hola, niños y niñas en la casa. Me llamo Jessica Dunn y soy la directora de Curriculum and Instruction para las escuelas públicas de Indianapolis. Estoy muy alegre de estar en su casa. I'm really happy to be at your house today. And today we are going to do something really cool. We are going to be learning about using context clues. Now, because I don't have a student, because we're social distancing, I thought it would be good if I had a little guy here to help me, a little bottle of hand sanitizer, which hopefully you all are staying home, using hand sanitizer, social distancing, washing hands lots and lots. And so my friend here, this little guy right here, his name is Jorge. So Jorge and I are going to be going over using context clues. And so in your packet, you'll see that the introduction about context clues is basically when you don't know a word that you come across in a text, you try and figure out what the word means by using words around it to determine the meaning of the unknown word. So it's almost like you're being a little detective. Jorge, have you ever been a detective before? Jorge has. Jorge says he knows what a detective does. A detective finds clues to find and solve mysteries. And that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be solving the mystery of words. And so today we're going to go through on your packet that you have. This is page number 12. You'll see that they have the context clue, signal words, and then examples. And so one type of context clue that you can find when you're reading, and let's say again you don't know what a word means, so let's say for example you don't know what the word pray means. You could perhaps find the definition by a context clue. And signal words that you would look for are, is, means, or. So right now I'm going to read the example. Larger animals often treat smaller animals as prey, remember this is the word we don't know, or something to be killed or eaten. Now, let me see. I said there was a signal word here. Is it are? Nope. Is, means, or. I see this word or. So I'm going to circle the word or right here. So larger animals often treat smaller animals as prey, or, looks like I have my definition here, something to be killed and eaten. So I think about, for example, I love watching Shark Channel. Jorge, Shark Week on the Discovery Channel, not Shark Channel, even though I wish there was a Shark Channel, Jorge. Jorge, do you remember seeing Shark Week and seeing all of those sharks and them eating seals? I do too. I think that that's what prey means. And I have found this here by looking at this definition that I know prey is something to be killed and eaten, much like those sharks eat the seals. Another way that you can find context clues, besides looking for the definition, is by seeing if there's an example in the sentence. And so signal words for examples would be words like, such as, for, and the word example. Pretty simple, Jorge, huh? So let's see here. Let's read this example. Predators such as hawks, wolves, and coyotes hunt rabbits. So here they're giving us an example. And the signal word, what was it, Jorge? Oh, two words. Such as were the signal words. Such as. So such as is the signal word, or the signal words that let us know that this predator, they give us examples. Some predators are hawks, some are wolves, some are coyotes, and what they do is they hunt rabbits. So they're giving us examples of what predators are. Animals that hunt, such as a shark, like Shark Week, right? Or hawks, wolves, and coyotes. The next type of context clue that we might find is when we call cause and effect. So signal words here might be as a result of, because, and thanks to. So in this next sentence, we have because many animals eat rabbits, the number of wild animals has decreased. So this is the word that we don't know, decreased. We don't know what decreased means. And so what we do, Jorge, do we see a signal word? You do. The signal word here, oh, you got it, because. Because is the signal word. And so we use the signal word to see, okay, cause and effect. So let me think here. I don't know this word decreased, but because many animals eat rabbits, the number of wild animals has decreased. So I think decreased is giving me a cause and effect. Animals eat rabbits, and then the number of animals decreases. It must be that they go down, Jorge. What do you think? So I think decreased means they go down in number. So that's the cause and effect. The next context clue that we have here, Jorge, is comparison and contrast. And signal words here would be like, to, similarly, but, unlike, and although. So, Jorge, let's read the sentence. First of all, what word do we not know? Nope, that's right, carnivorous. We do not know the word carnivorous. And so we're going to use some context clues to try and find what the word carnivorous means. Remember when we talked about this at the beginning, we said that we were going to be like detectives, and we've been like detectives so far, right? With definition, example, cause, and effect. So let's try a comparison and contrast. Okay, carnivorous. Although wolves eat both plants and animals, hawks are completely carnivorous. So, Jorge, yep, you got this. You got it. The signal word is although. Although is the signal word. And so with although, it's going to help us. It's a comparison and contrast. So let's see here. Although wolves eat both plants and animals, so both plants and animals, hawks are completely carnivorous. So they're saying wolves eat both plants and animals, but they're saying that hawks are only carnivorous. You know, Jorge, did you just say you didn't? You know the word carne in Spanish means meat? Oh my goodness, great use of cognates. That can also help you. He thinks that this word, given the comparing and contrasting about the wolves eating plants and animals, and knowing that carne in Spanish means meat, he is using context clues and his idea of understanding cognates to know that the word carnivorous means that hawks are only meat eaters. Jorge, you're setting the world on fire today, buddy. So, again, let's go over this, Jorge. Are you ready? Here we go. We've got the definition. We've got examples, cause and effect, comparison and contrast. And remember, you've got signal words that are going to help you. So when you don't know a word, you're going to be that detective, right, Jorge? And you're going to try and use the clues around you to figure out the meaning of the unknown word. So we're going to go right now into the packet a little bit deeper. And, you know, the guided practice says that they want you to tell a partner the meaning of the underlined words. Well, if you're at home right now and you don't have a partner, that might be a little difficult. So we're going to go through the guided practice together. So the directions say, read the paragraph below. Circle context clues to help you figure out the meaning of the underlined words. Tell a partner the meaning of the underlined words. Now, I don't have a student here with me, just my friend Jorge. You might want to do the same at home. You might want to get a bottle of hand sanitizer or one of your best stuffed animals or a little doll. Whatever you have, you can also have a partner, but Jorge's my partner right now. So Jorge, are you ready? Let's read this paragraph. But first, there's a hint. Think about the different types of context clues. Look for words that signal examples, cause and effect, and contrast. Then use the clues to help you figure out the meaning of the underlying words. Are you ready? Let's go for it. Marsupials are mammals that carry their young in pouches. The American opossum is a marsupial. So, Jorge, let's see. Do you see a signal word there? I see the word are. Makes me think that this is a definition. It tells me right there, marsupials, that's what they are. They're mammals that carry their young in pouches. So it gives me that, you didn't even have to look that hard. The definition one is the pretty easy context clue, wouldn't you say? I think so too. So let's keep going. Thanks to its defense mechanism, the opossum keeps itself safe from predators. When threatened, it hisses, growls, and bites. If that doesn't work, the opossum reacts in an unusual way. Well, we've got this underlined 2 words here, defense mechanisms. I've got that clue, that signal word, thanks to its defense mechanism, the opossum keeps itself safe from predators. So I think that's an example. The defense mechanism must be what keeps the opossum safe from those things trying to eat it. I love trying to find the context clues. You know what? I feel like a pretty good detective right now. Let's keep going. Although many animals move quickly to escape danger, the opossum collapses and pretends to be dead. He pretends to be dead? Oh my goodness gracious, he collapses. I don't know what that word means, but I've got a signal word there, although. And although means compare and contrast. So he must collapse and pretend to be dead. He must fall. That's what that must mean. Oh, wow. Here we go. One more sentence, Jorge. This is an unconscious response to stress that is similar to jerking your hand away from a hot object before thinking. Similar to that. I think that must be like such as or like an unconscious response. That's a word I don't know. Unconscious. It must be something that I'm not aware of in my mind. Jorge, it has been so much easier to read this today now that I have learned how to use context clues. So you know what's going to be really exciting? When all those great kids, those fabulous IPS 6th grade scholars are at home and they turn to page 13 and they start to independently do the four problems that they have in the packet. They get to practice using context clues, just like you and I did, Jorge. Sound like a good idea for them? Yep, because at home you are learning and growing, and we so wish that we were able to see you in our schools. However, we're not. And because of that, we need you to do your very, very, very best to keep learning at home and keep excelling and keep being safe. And remember that we all miss you and can't wait for you to return to IPS.
This is MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23. Here's what's coming up next.
Hi, 7th graders. Welcome back. We are in Module 4, Lesson 1. In Module 4, Fever, you will study the yellow fever epidemic of 1793. I am sure you can imagine how relevant you will find this topic given the global situation we are in right now. In some ways, the situation we are in today is not like any other, but human societies have endured other epidemics and pandemics. In this module, we will study one epidemic from history, when the citizens of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania experienced an epidemic of yellow fever in the summer and fall of 1793. At Great Minds, we believe that reading books, stories, and informational text gives you a safe way to experience complex emotions. Our work together in Grade 7 Module 4 will engage you but will also challenge you to confront facts and ideas that may be unsettling. As you work throughout the module, remember, life in 1793 was very different than life today. The yellow fever epidemic of 1793 took place at a time when we knew less about disease and how to treat it. As a result, responses to the epidemic were very different from today. But just as today, many people demonstrated their caring, strength, and resilience in the face of the challenge. So this is the question that we will answer together throughout this module. How can times of crisis affect citizens and society? I'm sure you will see how important this question is to us today and throughout this module. I look forward to learning with you. So let's get going. All right, take a minute to read our expectations. Consider which one you think you've been doing particularly well. How has it helped you to learn? Let's keep that in mind as we learn today. Great. In this lesson, you will need the materials on the slide. All right. If you are a Wit and Wisdom student, reflect on a character from one of the books we've read this year. Maybe Castle Diary, The Midwife's Apprentice, The Canterbury Tales, Code Talkers, Farewell to Manzanar, and Animal Farm. If you are not a Wit and Wisdom student, think about a book that you've read where a character has encountered challenges. All right. Label in your notebook or in your journal, stop and jot. And take 3 minutes to answer the questions on the slide. What challenge or challenges did the character face? And how did the character respond to the challenge or challenges? This reflection helps us to think about previous books we've read where characters face challenges. In our text for this module, Fever 1793, the main character, Maddie, faces challenges you may find especially relevant today. So for our module, we will need to know the meaning of the word crisis. In your journal, jot down the definition of the word crisis while I read it out loud to you. All right, crisis, a noun, a time of serious difficulty or danger. A period or situation of instability or upheaval for a society or an individual. The moment when a disease or fever turns better or worse. So think of the character and his or her challenge that you just described in the stop and jot you completed. Was it a challenge or was it a crisis? Try to differentiate between those two words now that you have the definition of crisis. If you feel like you wrote about a challenge, pause and consider if you can think of a crisis instead. Revise or rewrite your stop and jot if needed. If you wrote about a crisis or revised to address a crisis, consider this question. How did that crisis affect the people involved? In this module, we will explore an overarching essential question. We've talked about this just a moment ago. How can times of crisis affect citizens and society? As we learn in this module, we will keep this question in our mind to guide our learning. And also in this module, we have a focusing question for the first set of lessons, which will focus our learning for the whole series of lessons. Read it with me. In what context did the yellow fever epidemic of 1793 emerge? So as you well know, each of the 5 content stages has a content framing question that guides our learning. Today we are in the wonder content stage, and our very first wonder question is, what do I notice and wonder about Fever 1793? Let's consider the question on the screen. What do you notice and wonder about the front cover of our text, Fever 1793? If you are doing these lessons with a learning partner, stop and share your thoughts. If not, say your thoughts aloud because it helps us to understand what we're thinking when we say it out loud. So I hope you had an opportunity to share your thinking. I noticed that the girl's eye is yellow. It looks like something is very wrong. The title is Fever 1793. I wonder if this takes place in 1793. The review says, the plot rages like the epidemic itself. I don't know what an epidemic is, but I know we are experiencing a pandemic right now. I wonder what's the difference, or if they are related. This book won an award. I hope this means it will be a really great one to read. So in the next section of this lesson, we will continue to notice and wonder as we go on to read chapters 1 and 2 of this book. Welcome back. Take a moment to create a notice and wonder chart in your journal. I'm going to read chapter 1, and as you listen to it read aloud, follow along if you have your book. If not, just listen. We will capture these on our chart. Remember, keep noticing and wondering as we read together. Chapter 1, August 16th, 1793. I woke to the sound of a mosquito whining in my left ear and my mother screeching in the right. "Rouse yourself this instant!" Mother snapped open the shutters and heat poured into our bedchamber. The room above our coffee house was not large. 2 beds, a washstand, and a wooden trunk with frayed leather straps nearly filled it. It seemed even smaller with Mother storming around. "Get out of bed, Matilda," she continued. "You're sleeping the day away." She shook my shoulder. "Polly's late and there's work to be done." Great. I'm going to actually share what I noticed and wondered along the way for chapter 1 with you, because I did this in the welcome module. Do you remember that? I wanted you to know that you can have many noticings and wonderings as long as we're using the text for evidence. So I'm going to share mine now, and you can check yours out to see if they matched, or maybe you want to add some to your own T-chart. So I noticed that the chapter starts with a date. I think that that's when the story begins. August 16th, 1793. I noticed that they live above a coffee house. I thought people only drank tea in the olden days. And I'm wondering who Polly is. It says that she's late and there's work to be done. Let's keep reading. Remember to capture your noticings and wonderings as we read. The noisy mosquito darted between us. I started to sweat under the thin blanket. It was going to be another hot August day. Another long, hot August day. Another long, hot, boring, wretched August day. I can't tell you who was lazier, Polly or you, Mother muttered as she stalked out of the room. When I was a girl, we were up before the sun. Her voice droned on and on as she clattered down the stairs. I groaned. Mother had been a perfect girl. Her family was wealthy then, but that didn't stop her from stitching entire quilts before breakfast or spinning miles of wool before tea. It was the war, she liked to remind me. Children did what was asked of them, and she never complained. Oh no, never. Good children were seen and not heard. How utterly unlike me. I yawned and stretched, then snuggled back onto my pillow. A few more minutes' rest. That's what I needed. I'd float back to sleep, drifting like Blanchard's giant yellow balloon. I could just see it. The winter's day, the crowds on the rooftops, the balloon tugging at its ropes. I held my breath. Would the ropes break? The devilish mosquito attacked, sinking its needle nose into my forehead. Ow! I leapt from my bed and, thunk, cracked my head on the sloped ceiling. The ceiling was lower than it used to be. Either that or I had grown another inch overnight. I sat back down, wide awake now, my noggin sporting 2 lumps. One from the ceiling, one from the mosquito. No balloon trips for me. So what did you notice and wonder? I noticed and wondered quite a few things. It seems like the girl's relationship with her mom is not easy. And I'm still not sure who Polly is. Is it her sister? It sounds like the girl is not perfect. She's not a perfect hard worker like her mother was or is. She wants to lie in bed and daydream. And why does the author keep mentioning the mosquitoes? I wonder what Blanchard's giant yellow balloon was. Did they have hot air balloons back then? Did you have any of the same noticings and wonderings? Good work so far. Let's keep reading. So you keep noticing and wondering, but I'm going to make myself a little bit bigger so that as I'm reading, you can see I'm going to hold the book and it's going to feel like a read aloud now. But keep noticing and wondering. To work then. I got to my feet and crossed the room, ducking my head cautiously. The water in the wash basin was cloudy and the face cloth smelled like old cheese. I decided to clean up later, perhaps next December. A squeaking mouse dashed by my toes, followed by a flash of orange fur named Silas. The mouse ran to a corner, its claws scratching desperately on the floorboards. Silas pounced. The squeaking stopped. "Oh, Silas, did you have to do that?" Silas didn't answer. He rarely did. Instead, he jumped up on Mother's quilt and prepared to pick apart his breakfast. Mother's best quilt. Mother abhorred mice. I sprang across the room. "Get down," I commanded. Silas hissed at me but obeyed, leaping to the floor and padding out the door. "Matilda!" Mother's voice called up the stairs. "Now!" I made a face at the doorway. I had just saved her precious quilt from disaster, but would she appreciate it? Of course not. No more dawdling. I had to get dressed. I fastened my stays in a badly embroidered pocket over the white shift I slept in. Then I stepped into my blue linen skirt. It nearly showed my ankles. Along with the ceiling getting lower, my clothes were shrinking too. I noticed that we're learning a lot about the girl Matilda. She does not think her mom appreciates her. She's growing. She hits her head and her clothes are too small. She doesn't seem to be worried about how she looks. She decides not to clean up in the wash basin. So if you have ideas that you want to share and you're working with a family member or friend, stop and share your thoughts. If not, feel free to say your ideas aloud. It can still be really helpful. So let's continue reading and let's continue considering what we notice and wonder. Once dressed, I faced the rather dead mouse and wrinkled my nose. Picking it up by the tail, I carried the corpse to the front window and leaned out. My city, Philadelphia, was wide awake. My heart beat faster and my head cleared. Below the window, High Street teemed with horsemen, carriages, and carts. I could hear Mrs. Henning gossiping on her front stoop, and dogs barking at a pig running loose in the street. The sound of the blacksmith's hammer on his anvil reminded me of Polly, our tardy serving girl. That's where she was, no doubt, in the blacksmith's shop, eyeing Matthew, the blacksmith's son. I didn't like it there. The roaring furnace, sparks crackling in the air, the sizzle of hot metal into cold water, it all reminded me of that unmentionable place the preachers liked to go on about. My favorite place was the waterfront. I squinted eastward. The rooftop of the State House, where the Congress met, was visible, but the August haze and dust from the street made it impossible to see farther than that. On a clear day, I could see the masts of the ships tied up at the wharves on the Delaware River. I promised myself a secret visit to the docks later, as soon as Polly arrived to distract Mother. A few blocks south lay the Walnut Street prison, where Blanchard had flown that remarkable balloon. From the prison's courtyard, it rose, a yellow silk bubble escaping the earth. I vowed to do that one day, slip free of the ropes that held me. Nathaniel Benson had heard me say it, but he did not laugh. He understood. Perhaps I would see him at the docks, sketching a ship or seagulls. It had been a long time since we talked. But before I went anywhere, there was a dead mouse to dispose of. I couldn't throw it into High Street. It might spook one of the horses. I crossed the room and opened the back window overlooking the garden. Maybe Silas would smell his treat out there and get a decent breakfast after all. I flung the corpse as far as I could, then hurried downstairs before Mother boiled over. We just finished chapter 1. Let's consider what we notice and wonder. So pause the video now and jot down your noticings and wonderings. I'll share mine with you. Feel free to check off or circle if you have some of the same ones. Now we know who Polly is. She's a servant. And the balloon must have been a hot air balloon. There are a lot of details to show this is taking place a long time ago. The streets are filled with horses and carriages. A pig is running in the streets. Matilda is not scared of things. She picks up the mouse and throws it out the window. She wants to get away. Did you notice anything about the way the story is being told? What did you notice? Who was telling the story? Yes, Matilda. She's telling the story herself. This is first-person point of view. So I think that this is a historical fiction story because it seems like it's going to be based on the events of the yellow fever epidemic, but through the eyes of a fictional character named Maddie or Matilda, who we just met in chapter 1. So if you are a Wit and Wisdom student, you might recall that this is a little bit like Castle Diary because it's told in the first person. And it also seems a little bit like The Midwife's Apprentice too, because it's about a girl and it takes place a long time ago. I'm going to pause the video now and ask that you return to the next section to listen to chapter 2. We are going to continue reading Fever 1793, reading chapter 2, and I'd like you to consider continuing to notice and wonder as we read. I'll pause at certain points so that you can do so, but feel free to notice and wonder anytime as we're reading chapter 2. If you have the text in front of you, you can follow along, and if not, don't worry, just listen up. Great. Chapter 2, August 16th, 1793. There's a little quote right underneath the date that I'd like to read. The first and most principal to be a perfect skill and knowledge in cookery, because it is a duty well belonging to women. By Gervase Markham, from the English Housewife, 1668. Let's begin chapter 2. As I stepped into the kitchen, Mother started her lecture. Too much sleep is bad for your health, Matilda. She slipped a freshly made ball of butter into a stone crock. It must be a grip, a sleeping sickness. I tried not to listen to her. I had not cleared the wax from my ears all summer, hoping it would soften her voice. It had not worked. You should be dosed with fish oil. When I was a girl, she kept talking to herself as she carried a steaming pot of water outside to rinse the butter churn. I sat down at the table. Our kitchen was larger than most, with an enormous hearth crowded with pots and kettles, and 2 bake ovens built into the brickwork beside it. The size of the room did not match the size of our family. We were only 3, Mother, Grandfather, and me, plus Eliza, who worked for us. But the roomy kitchen could feed 100 people in a day. My family owned the Cook Coffee House. The soon-to-be famous Cook Coffee House, Grandfather liked to say. My father had built our home and business after the War for Independence ended in 1783. I was 4 years old. The coffee house sat just off the corner of 7th and High Streets. At first, we were lucky if a lost farmer strayed in, but business improved when President Washington's house was built 2 blocks away. Father was a carpenter by trade, and he built us a sturdy home. The room where we served customers filled most of the first floor and had 4 large windows. The kitchen was tucked into the back, filled with useful shelves and built-in cupboards to store things. We could have used a sitting room, truth be told. Father would have added one if he lived, but he fell off a ladder and died of a broken neck 2 months after the coffee house opened. That's when Grandfather joined us. A coffee house was a respectable business for a widow and her father-in-law to run. Mother refused to serve spirits, but she allowed card games and a small bit of gambling as long as she didn't have to see it. By midday, the front room was usually crowded with gentlemen, merchants, and politicians enjoying a cup of coffee, a bite to eat, and the news of the day. Father would have been proud. I wonder what he would have thought of me. "Good morning," Eliza said loudly, startling me. "I thought you were going to sleep the day away. Have you eaten?" She set a sack of coffee beans on the table. "I'm starving," I said, clutching my stomach. As usual, she said with a smile. Let me get you something quick. Eliza was the coffeehouse cook. Mother couldn't prepare a meal fit for pigs. I found this amusing, considering our last name was Cook. In a manner, though, it was serious. If not for Eliza's fine victuals and the hungry customers who paid to eat them, we'd have been in the streets long ago. Mother's family had washed their hands of her when she ran off to marry a carpenter, a tradesman. The horror! When she was but 17. So we were very fond of Eliza. Like most blacks in Philadelphia, Eliza was free. She said Philadelphia was the best city for freed slaves or freeborn Africans. The Quakers here didn't hold with slavery and tried hard to convince others that slavery was against God's will. Black people were treated different than white people. That was plain to see. But Eliza said nobody could tell her what to do or where to go, and no one would ever beat her again. She had been born a slave near Williamsburg, Virginia. Her husband saved up his horseshoeing money and bought her freedom right after they were married. She told me that was the best day of her life. She moved to Philadelphia and cooked for us, saving her wages to set her husband free. Take a moment, pause now, consider what you notice and what you wonder in these first few pages of chapter 2. Excellent work. Let's keep reading. When I was 8, she got a letter saying her husband had been killed by a runaway horse. That was her worst day. She didn't say a word for months. My father had only been dead 2 years, so Mother knew just what lay in Eliza's heart. They both supped sorrow with a big spoon. That's what Mother said. It took years, but the smile slowly returned to Eliza's face. She didn't turn sour like Mother did. Eliza was the luckiest person I knew. She got to walk from the river past shop windows, market stalls, and the courthouse up to 7th Street every morning. She told stories even better than grandfather, and she knew how to keep a secret. She laughed once when I told her that she was my best friend, but it was the truth. She dished up a bowl of oatmeal from a pot that hung by the side of the hearth, then carefully set it in front of me. Eat up, she said. One corner of her mouth turned up just a bit, and she winked. I tasted the oatmeal. It was sweet. Eliza had hidden a sugar lump at the bottom of the bowl. Thank you, I whispered. You're welcome, she whispered back. Why is Polly late? I asked. Have you seen her? Eliza shook her head. Your mother is in a lather, I promise you, she warned. If Polly doesn't get here soon, she may need to find herself another position. I bet she's dawdling by the forge, I said, watching Matthew work with his shirt collar open. Maybe she's ill, Eliza said. There's talk of sickness by the river. Mother strode into the room carrying wood for the fire. Serving girls don't get sick, Mother said. If she doesn't appear soon, you'll have to do her chores as well as your own, Matilda. And where's your grandfather? I sent him to inquire about a box of tea an hour ago. He should have returned by now. I'd be happy to search for him, I offered. I could look for Polly, too. Mother added wood to the fire, poking the logs until the flames jumped. The delicate tip of her shoe tapped impatiently. No, I'll go. If Father comes back, don't let him leave. And Matilda, see to the garden. She quickly tied a bonnet under her chin and left, the back door closing behind her with the sharp sound of a musket shot. So let's stop and pause. Consider what we notice and wonder at this midway point of chapter 2. Great work. Let's keep reading. Well, said Eliza, that's it then. Here, have some veal and cornbread. Seems like you've a long day ahead of you. After she cut me 2 slices of cold veal and a thick piece of fresh cornbread, Eliza started to make gingerbread one of her specialties. Nutmeg and cinnamon perfumed the air as she ground the spices with a pestle. If not for the heat, I could have stayed in the kitchen for an eternity. The house was silent except for the popping of applewood in the fire and the tall clock ticking in the front room. I took a sip from a half-filled mug on the table. Ugh, it's coffee! Black coffee, bitter as medicine. How can you drink this? I asked Eliza. It tastes better if you don't steal it, she answered. She took the cup from my hands. Pour your own and leave mine be. Are we out of cider? I asked. I could get some at the marketplace. Oh no, said Eliza. You'll stay right here. Your mother needs your help, and that poor garden is like to expire. It is time for you to haul some water, little Maddie. Little Maddie indeed. Another month and I'd be almost as tall as Eliza. I hated to be called little. I sighed loudly, put my dishes in the washtub, and tucked my hair into my mob cap. I tied a disreputable straw hat atop the cap, one I could never wear in the street, and snatched a bite of dough from Eliza's bowl before I ran outside. The garden measured 50 paces up one side and 20 along the other, but after 6 weeks of drought, it seemed as long and wide as a city block, filled with thousands of drooping plants crying for help. I dropped the bucket into the well to fill it with water, then turned the handle to bring it back up again. Little Maddie, indeed. I was big enough to be ordered around like an unpaid servant, big enough for Mother to grumble about finding me a husband. I carried the water to the potato patch and poured it out too fast, big enough to plan for the day when I would no longer live here. If I was going to work as hard as a mule, it might as well be for my own benefit. I was going to travel to France and bring back fabric and combs and jewelry that the ladies of Philadelphia would swoon over. And that was just for the dry goods store. I wanted to own an entire city block, a proper restaurant, an apothecary, maybe a school or a hatter's shop. Grandfather said I was a daughter of liberty, a real American girl. I could steer my own ship. No one would call me Little Maddie. They would call me Ma'am. Dash it all! I had watered a row of weeds. As I returned to the well, Mother came through the garden gate. Where's Polly? I asked as I dropped the bucket down the well. Did you pass by the blacksmith's? I spoke with her mother, with Mistress Logan, Mother answered softly, looking at her neat rows of carrots. And? I waved a mosquito away from my face. It happened quickly. Polly sewed by candlelight after dinner. Her mother repeated that over and over. She sewed by candlelight after dinner. And then she collapsed. I released the handle and the bucket splashed, a distant sound. Matilda. Polly's dead. So friends, that's the end of chapter 2. I'd like you to pause the video and continue with your noticings and wonderings. All right, so let's consider what we noticed and wonder about the following items on the slide. Okay, so there are some prompts or some questions. What did you notice about the narrator of the story and her family? The development of the plot, the city of Philadelphia, being a girl or a woman in 1793, and being an African American in Philadelphia in 1793. Take a moment now and add notice and wonderings specific to the questions on the slide to your notice and wonder chart. Pause the video and do this now. So I noticed that the author included historical details in these chapters. Did you notice that too? In the next section, we'll review our noticings to try to identify the historical details and what the details suggest about the research the author did to write this book. So let's think about what is one detail from chapter 1 or 2 that seems to foreshadow a coming crisis. I'd like you to write the answer to this or your thoughts to this in your journal right now. Pause the video and do this now. Great, so thank you for noticing and wondering. In part 2, we will begin our module research work.
You've been watching MyIPS on MyINDY-TV 23, a free educational service provided by Circle City Broadcasting of Indianapolis. MyIPS airs weekday mornings from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. For more information, special announcements, and the weekly program schedule, go to wishtv.com. You can also follow us on Facebook.